Back in a previous video when the weather was much worse than this, I said I'd have to look at wiring up some spotlights into these little holes.
Let's see if we can wire in some lights into these little holes.
Which are where the real Ranger Raptor's recovery points peek out of. After looking at the dimensions of various spotlights on the web, I found that these Stedi work lights should be just the right fit. So hopefully they will fit just nicely behind that little window. Then because I've got these little covers that fit over there, what I'm thinking of doing is getting a bit of amber perspex to go in front of the spotlight to give it like an amber glow. But first things first, I need to undo a few nuts and bolts and get this skid plate off. So alongside those two little spotlights, I also found a 32-inch light bar to fit in the bumper's letterbox. I managed to find this particular one on offer on eBay from Lights. It's an unbranded product that just says light bar on the side, but the same model seems to be sold by Strolux and Heller, both of which are well reviewed. To wire them all up, I bought some harnesses, also from Lights on eBay. These come in a bit cheaper than the alternatives from Stedi, but they're pretty much the same with relay, built-in fuse and Deutsch connectors. I didn't want any of my lights hooking up via the full beam, so these were ideal. Then on the rear, this aftermarket bumper also came with a couple of square pod lights that mount on the inside. If you remember, those new rear lights didn't come with a built-in fog light, so I disassembled one of those rear pod lights and replaced the square lens with a piece of red perspex instead. I'm hoping I can hook this side up via the tow bar loom so I have a fully functioning fog light again, while the other I'll be wiring up to a switch for extra illumination while reversing. In order to get all these lights properly wired up, those harnesses needed installing. The positive connector goes to the battery, negative to a ground, the relay is mounted on a nearby bolt behind the battery, then the difficult part is getting the switch cable through the bulkhead into the cabin via the big rubber grommet. You need to get behind the glove box, so first empty out its contents. If you then squeeze both sides, you can drop it down to gain access behind the dash. Follow the mass of cables towards the back and peel back a bit of the sound deadening to reveal a portion of that rubber grommet. Use a screwdriver to pierce a hole in it. Since I had 3 of these cables I'd need to push through, I gave it an extra few stabs with a knife to widen the hole as much as possible. Next, you need to find a way to feed something through the hole, which you can then tape the cable to and pull it back through. Since I haven't seen a metal coat hanger for about 20 years, I used some spare 3-core electrical cable, which was stiff enough to push through the hole while also being bendy enough to feed it up into reach. A bit of Gorilla Tape firmly secured the switch cable, then a good tug pulled it through the grommet. Repeated 2 more times for the other switches. Then one super important step is to get your daughter to organise the cables into a beautiful braid to keep them all neat and tidy before feeding them over towards the centre of the dash. While the harnesses do come with little switches, I had already picked up the Stedi switch panel and associated switches, so the ends of the wires needed cutting off and matching up to the coloured wires from the Stedi switches. A bit of bad soldering later and this rat's nest of wires was all hooked up and ready to be squashed out of sight. Back under the bonnet, all that was left was to run the cables to their respective lights, zip tying them in place along the way. And here's the final result. If it wasn't for that bumper having a dedicated slot for a light bar, I probably wouldn't have bothered getting one for the amount of time I'd actually use it. But it looks really cool and pumps out a lot of light, ideal for dazzling my neighbours. Those amber spotties turned out perfect too. Yellow and amber is said to be better than white for snow and fog, and from my little driveway test you can see the difference compared to the ultra bright light bar. You get much more depth perception. Hopefully they will come in handy when we next get a blizzard. Now you might notice there was one switch in that panel that isn't hooked up yet. Since I bought one of the cheapest ranges I could find for this project, it doesn't have the diff lock option, which is actually quite rare on these earlier models anyway. If I do get into more serious off-roading, I'm planning to add an air locker, so that switch is being reserved until then. So to see that potential upgrade in the future and anything else I do with this truck, be sure to hit the subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next one.